preparation room at Fetro Harper Mortuary is where the embalming happens, where the dead are made to look peaceful for their final viewing. It smells like formaldehyde and roses and something else underneath. Something sweet and spoiled that no amount of Pine Sol ever removes. I've worked the night shift for 3 years now, mopping the checkered linoleum and hauling out biohazard bags, and I've learned things about this building that nobody writes down in the employee handbook. I'm not supposed to enter the preparation room after midnight. Nobody told me that when Dale Harper hired me. I figured it out myself the first time I heard the whispering. It started around 12:30 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, right around the time the fog rolled up from Paint Creek and settled over Jefferson Street like a wet wool blanket. I was running my mop along the hallway outside the prep room when voices drifted through the door. Low and urgent, the way people talk when they don't want to be overheard. The room should have been empty. The morticians, Glenn Fetro and his nephew Cody, had gone home hours earlier. I opened the door. 3 bodies lay on 3 stainless steel tables, exactly where they'd been positioned for embalming the next morning, covered in white sheets. Nobody else in the room. But the whispering continued, and as I stood there with my mop handle digging into my palm, I realized the sounds were coming from beneath the sheets. The dead were talking to each other. I ran, dropped the mop, sprinted through the viewing parlor, slammed through the back door into the gravel parking lot. I sat in my truck with the doors locked and the engine idling until my hands stopped shaking enough to drive. The whole way home on Route 753, I kept checking my rearview mirror for something following. But I came back the next night because I needed the money, and because a part of me, some stupid, curious part, needed to know if I'd imagined it. I hadn't. This time, I pressed my ear against the preparation room door and listened. 3 voices, all speaking at once, words tumbling over each other in sentences I couldn't quite piece together. Then one voice rose above the others, clearer and more urgent. "It's coming back. It comes when we're fresh. It comes to take what's left." I should have left for good. Called Dale Harper and told him I'd found a better job at the tire factory in Washington Courthouse. Instead, I opened the door. The 3 bodies were sitting up on their tables, sheets pooled around their waists, all facing the door, facing me. Their eyes were open, not the glassy stare of the deceased, but eyes full of terror and desperate hope. The one in the middle, an older woman named Dorothy Klein, whose obituary said she'd been a piano teacher at the Methodist Church, opened her mouth. Her voice sounded like wind scraping through winter branches. "You can hear us? You're the first one who can hear us in 40 years. Dorothy Klein's mouth moved, but the sounds that emerged didn't match her lips. The words seemed to crawl up from somewhere deeper than her throat, vibrating through tissue that should have been still and silent. "Please," she said. "It comes through the back door at 3 a.m. It looks like a mourner, but it isn't. Don't let it touch the bodies. Don't let it take what's left of us." The man on her left, a heavy-set fellow in his 60s whose face I recognized from the Greenfield Gazette obituary page, Earl Whitmore, retired machinist from the Meade plant, turned his head toward me with a wet, grinding sound. His neck moved in ways that suggested the embalming hadn't quite reached all his joints yet. 40 years, Earl said. His voice was thicker than Dorothy's, like speaking through a mouthful of cold honey. 40 years since anyone could hear us. The last one was a night watchman named Virgil Combs. He tried to stop it. We watched it take him apart. The third body, a younger woman I didn't recognize, began to cry. No tears fell. Her tear ducts had been sealed during preparation, but her shoulders shook and small, strangled sounds escaped her sewn lips. Someone had already done the preliminary work on her face, and the stitches stretched but held. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Maybe I was too scared to sound scared. Tessa Ratliff, Dorothy answered for her. Car accident on Route 50 3 days ago. She's the freshest. It will want her most. I looked at my watch. 12:52 a.m. A little over 2 hours until whatever they feared came through that back door, the same door I used every night to haul trash to the dumpster behind the parking lot. What is it? I asked. What comes at 3 a.m.? The three of them exchanged glances. Even with their limited mobility, even with Earl's eyes clouded and Tessa's face half prepared for viewing, something passed between them. A shared memory, a shared terror. We don't know what it's called, Dorothy said. We only know what it does. When a person dies, there's a piece of them that stays behind. Just for a little while. The soul hasn't left yet. It's still attached, like a balloon on a string. That piece is what lets us talk, lets us think, lets us remember who we were. It fades after a few days, and then we're just meat, ready to move on. Earl picked up where she left off. But this thing, it feeds on that piece. It consumes the last echo of who we were. And when it does, there's nothing left. No moving on, no peace, just gone, like we never existed at all. Tessa's crying grew louder. The stitches in her lips strained. The mortuary has rules, Dorothy continued. Old rules, passed down since this building was constructed in 1923. They're written in a ledger somewhere. I remember seeing it when I was alive, when I came here to make arrangements for my husband Bernard. But nobody follows them anymore. Nobody remembers why they matter. What rules? I asked. Dorothy's dead eyes met mine. In the dim light of the preparation room, with only the glow from the hallway spilling through the cracked door, her gaze held more life than any corpse should possess. First, never open the back door between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. The door must remain locked and sealed. If you hear knocking, do not answer. If you hear a voice you recognize, do not answer. It learns the voices of the dead, and it uses them. Earl spoke next. Second, keep the preparation room lights on throughout the night. It doesn't like brightness. The old fluorescent tubes in here, the ones that flicker, they were installed specifically because the strobing disrupts its movement. Don't replace them with modern bulbs, no matter what the supply company says. Third, Tessa said, and I startled at her voice. It was younger than the others, and sadder. If it gets inside, don't look at its hands. Whatever you do, don't look at its hands. The clock on the wall read 1:04 a.m. Less than 2 hours now. There are more rules, Dorothy said, but we don't know them all. We only know what we've seen from these tables, what we've heard whispered by the bodies that came before us. Find the ledger. It should be in the office, in the old filing cabinet that nobody opens anymore. The one with the brass handles. I thought about the cabinet she meant. I'd dusted it 100 times and never once tried the drawers. And hurry, Earl added, because tonight it knows someone can hear us, and it's going to be hungry. I left the preparation room at 1:09 a.m., pulling the door closed behind me, but leaving it unlatched. The bodies had settled back onto their tables, their brief animation exhausted, but I could still hear Dorothy's voice echoing in my skull. Find the ledger. The office sat at the front of the building, past the viewing parlor with its velvet curtains and the reception area, where families signed paperwork through their grief. Fetro Harper Mortuary was an old Victorian house converted for funeral use sometime in the 20s, and the bones of the original structure still showed through. Crown molding darkened by decades of candle smoke, pocket doors that stuck in their tracks, floorboards that announced every footstep like a warning. Dale Harper's office smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. His desk was cluttered with invoices and sympathy card catalogs, and the walls were covered with framed photographs of previous owners going back generations. I recognized a few faces from the Greenfield Historical Society displays downtown. The Harper family had been burying Highland County's dead since before the Civil War. First in a small building near the covered bridge, then here on Jefferson Street after the original location burned in 1921. The filing cabinet Dorothy mentioned stood in the corner, half hidden behind a coat rack that nobody used. It was old, older than anything else in the room, made of dark oak with brass handles that had turned green with age. 4 drawers, each one labeled with faded paper tags I couldn't read in the dim light from the hallway. I tried the top drawer. Locked. Second drawer. Locked. Third drawer. Locked. The bottom drawer slid open with a groan that seemed too loud in the silent building. Inside, I found what looked like a century's worth of accumulated debris. Broken fountain pens, dried-out inkwells, rubber stamps with names I didn't recognize, and beneath it all, a leather-bound ledger with pages yellowed to the color of old teeth. The cover was embossed with a single word: Protocols. I carried it to Dale's desk and opened it beneath the green-shaded banker's lamp. The first page was dated November 3rd, 1923, written in handwriting so ornate it took me a moment to decipher. This record is to be maintained by all proprietors of the Fetro Funeral Home in perpetuity for the protection of the deceased and the living alike. What follows are the protocols established after the incident of October 1923, when we learned that death does not always mean departure, and that there are things which feed upon the transition between worlds. I turned the page. The next entry was dated 3 days later. Spoke with Reverend Aldrich at First Presbyterian. He confirmed what we suspected. The thing that came through the back door on the night of October 29th is not demonic in the traditional sense. It is older than Christianity, older than any faith that has a name. The Hopewell people knew of it. They built their burial mounds to protect their dead from its hunger. We do not have that luxury. We must make do with what protections we can. If you like the stories, please hype the videos from a button like this just above the comment section. It helps the videos to get more reach and perform well. It would take just a few seconds and cost nothing, but would help the channel grow even faster. Thank you. The protocols began on page 4. Some were the same rules Dorothy had recited, but expanded with details and reasoning. Protocol 1. The rear entrance must remain sealed between the hours of 2:45 and 3:15 in the morning. The entity arrives through this door because it was the door through which we carried out the bodies of the flu epidemic dead in 1918. Hundreds passed through that threshold in a single season. The boundary there is thin. The door should be reinforced with iron fixtures and a line of salt maintained along the interior jamb. I thought about the back door. The iron fixtures were still there, old rusted hinges that Dale complained about but never replaced. The salt line was gone, if it had ever existed during my tenure. Protocol 2. Illumination must be maintained in the preparation room at all times during night hours. The entity exists partially outside normal perception. Rapid changes in light, specifically the cycling frequency of gas lamps or, as we have recently discovered, electrical discharge tubes, interfere with its ability to fully manifest. Steady light offers no protection. The flickering is essential. Protocol 3. Should the entity breach the interior, avoid observing its extremities. The hands are not hands. Looking upon them directly causes a paralysis of will that leaves the observer vulnerable. Several witnesses to the October incident were lost this way. Protocol 4. Maintain absolute silence if the entity enters the preparation room. It tracks sound, not sight. Even breathing should be minimized. The deceased, in their liminal state, are capable of communicating without air, and thus are not detected. The living are not so fortunate. There was a 5th protocol, but the page was water damaged, and I could only make out fragments. Something about mirrors, something about names, a warning about the entity's ability to mimic. The 6th and 7th protocols were completely illegible, the ink having bled into brown stains that obscured everything beneath. I flipped through more pages, entry after entry, spanning decades. December 1931. Lost Harold Menifee to the thing. He answered the back door, believing it to be his brother Samuel, who had died that morning. The voice was perfect. We found what remained of Harold in the preparation room. August 1947. Successfully repelled the entity using iron instruments and concentrated salt solution. It fled before 3:15, but returned the following night with greater aggression. October 1971. Virgil Combs, night watchman, attempted to confront the entity directly. He had armed himself with a flashlight and a crucifix. Neither proved effective. The crucifix appeared to anger it. Combs was consumed over the course of 3 minutes. The sounds he made have not left my memory. March 1984. The entity did not appear. First absence in recorded history. Uncertain of the cause. Perhaps it feeds elsewhere. January 2019. Protocols have not been followed in years. New owner, D. Harper. Unaware of history. Filing cabinet has been moved to corner. Ledger buried beneath refuse. I am writing this as my final entry before retirement. May God help whoever finds this record. The last entry was signed by someone named Glenn Fetro Sr., the current mortician's father, I realized. He must have retired or died shortly after, and his son had never been told about the ledger, or had dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. I checked my watch. 1:38 a.m. Just over an hour until 3 a.m., and I had protocols I couldn't read, a back door with no salt line, and an entity that apparently knew for the first time in decades that someone in this building could hear the dead. The entries painted a picture I didn't want to see clearly. This thing had been feeding here for over a century. It had taken night watchmen and mourners and probably countless souls that nobody thought to record. It came every night, patient as hunger, and it would keep coming until there was nothing left to consume. The photographs on the wall seemed different now. All those Harper and Fetro men, staring down at me with expressions I'd always read as professional dignity. Now I recognized something else in their eyes. They knew. Every one of them had stood where I was standing, had read these same pages, had waited for 3 a.m. with their hearts in their throats. From somewhere in the back of the mortuary, I heard the preparation room door creak open. I moved through the darkened hallway with the ledger clutched against my chest, my sneakers squeaking against the linoleum in a rhythm that sounded too much like a heartbeat. The preparation room door stood open about 6 inches, and through the gap, I could see the flicker of those old fluorescent tubes, casting everything in stuttering light. "It wasn't us,"